Coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, you're listening to Mythic Radio.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground, which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7, 8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
The first thing we saw was this winged creature, 14-foot wingspan at least. It was huge. It almost covered half the road.
Welcome to Mythic Radio, everybody. I'm your host, Nick. Thank you for tuning in. Today is May 24th, and this is episode number 3. You can visit us over at mythicradio.com and share your own experiences by clicking on the Tell Your Story link. We'll share your story right here on the podcast. You can also get involved by joining our forums at mythicradio.com and by following us across all social media at Mythic Radio Live. Our topic on the show today is black-eyed children, or black-eyed kids, also known as BEK. I appreciate you sticking with me. I've been trying to get this episode out for quite a while now, and I'm very excited to do so. So what we're going to talk about is first the origins, and then I'm going to relay a couple of stories that I've found. And I think you'll find them very interesting. If you don't know what black-eyed children are, it's something that everyone should learn a little bit about. Whether it be an urban legend or not, it's definitely creepy. The origins of the black-eyed children. The supposed origins of the legend are from postings in 1998 written by Texas reporter Brian Bethel on a ghost-related mailing list, relating 2 alleged encounters with black-eyed kids. Bethel describes encountering 2 such children in Abilene, Texas in 1996, and claims that a second person had a similar unrelated encounter in Portland, Oregon in 2012. Brian Bethel told his story on the reality television series Monsters and Mysteries in America. He wrote a follow-up article for the Abilene Reporter News, describing his experience and maintaining his belief that it was legitimate. This is his story. In 1996, he was on his way to pay an internet bill at a local provider's office. He pulled over near a movie theater using the marquee's light to write a check. It was in this moment when a knock frightened him, a pair of pale knuckles tapping his driver's side window. Bethel looked up to see 2 young boys with hooded sweatshirts covering their faces. An immense rush of fear suddenly came over him. The fear, as Bethel remembered, was incomprehensible at the time. The boy, who seemed to be the leader of the 2, had curly hair and an olive complexion. The other boys stood in the background, red hair and freckles. Their appearance, though average at first glance, soon sent even more fear through his bones. The boys both had eyes that lacked any substance. They were just large swaths of pitch black. No life whatsoever. Frozen in his car, Bethel listened as the leader asked if they could have a ride to their mother's house. They wanted to get money to see a movie at the nearby theater. "It won't take long," the boy assured Bethel. "We're just kids." The boy would continue. Though these words were perhaps meant to ease Bethel's obvious terror, it only made him panic even more. He rolled the window up and put the car in reverse, ready to drive off. The boy yelled at him through the window of the car, "We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in." He drove away, quickly glancing one more time for the boys, but he saw nothing. Within seconds, they had completely disappeared out of sight. So regarding how people always see and encounter these black-eyed kids, black-eyed children, I'm going to go over some of the basic signs that people encounter. So this is what the majority of people see. Black-eyed children supposedly resemble kids between the ages of about 6 to 16 and usually arrive in pairs. They typically appear at night when they show up at the doors of unsuspecting residents and ask to use the bathroom, make a phone call, or grab something to eat. They have also been seen on buses, city streets, and in parking lots asking for a ride, such as Bethel encountered. It is common for only one of the children to do the talking, while the other child hangs its head as though not to show too much of its face. Once people open their door, they realize that the eyes of these so-called children are completely black. It is reported that they usually show themselves to adults rather than children. Their clothing and haircuts may appear odd or out of place in some instances, but in others they appear fairly normal. People that encounter them all describe a feeling of fear and complete and utter dread while the black-eyed children are present, even before making verbal contact with the black-eyed children. So what we have is a very odd phenomena happening, starting back in 1996, as I said. And you can make your own conclusion, of course. I'm still making mine. But now I'm going to read to you a couple different stories. And the stories that I'm going to read did not state who wrote them. They were on kind of a generic forum. But I found these two to be very interesting. The first one is kind of a standard textbook encounter. The second one is actually a supposed encounter where the subject actually let them into her house, and it kind of tells what she experienced after that. So the first one is called Halloween. It had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in ours and have a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we'd had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was about 9:30 p.m., and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows based on supposedly actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it was Halloween and all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn the porch light off and let our dog, Chloe, out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in her crate because we were afraid she'd try to get out and play with all of the kids, and I didn't want to have to chase her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the kids because she would look a little intimidating to younger kids. So I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out of her cage, and she followed me back to the couch and laid down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going to go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for bed. After all, it was Thursday, and he still had to get up early the next day. My teenage son was out with his friends at a local haunted house and wasn't expected back for another hour or so. So that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean those shows don't freak me out a bit. And being alone, now watching, I'd have to say, was kind of on edge. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water for the shower turn on when there came a light knock, knock, knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell, really? It's almost 10, go home. But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows, and in the dark and without the porch light, it would be extra obvious to anyone there. I paused, I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big beveled window. A beveled glass window, I should say. And anybody right at the door could see in enough to see someone was in the family room watching TV. It would be pretty rude for me to just sit there and not answer it. Knock, 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 again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, and she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way, as she usually does. Nothing. She wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room better and found her, crouching by the back door like she wanted to go out. However, she never asks to go out like that. She always comes and licks my hand and puts her head on my knee. This was totally out of character for her, and I have to say it heightened my anxiety. "Chloe, crate," I said. She just turned back and looked at me like, "Hell no, lady, I ain't moving." I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About the time a car drove down our street and cast just enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of two small children through the glass, I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably, a couple of my neighbors, on their way back home that wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't going to follow me. What a great watchdog, I thought to myself, as she just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the door, and sure enough, I could see through the glass that it was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and I began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to where I could block Chloe's escape, which was only about 2 feet that I opened the door. What struck me immediately as odd was the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were in normal street clothes. Also, no customary trick-or-treat either. I began to feel very uneasy again. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older. I'd say about 11 or 12. I could tell that she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features as our lights are from behind and high above on the columns at the front door, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter. I'd say about 8 or 9, and he looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can I please come in and use your phone to call our mom?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anybody ask me to use my home phone. Hun, don't you have a phone of your own you can call your mom?" I asked. This was when things got weird. Both kids turned to look at one another, like they were going to say something to one another, but never ever spoke. They both turned back to me, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit, there were two competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart that wanted to help these two small children get to their mom. The other was a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed that during the short conversation, I had already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number, and I can call her myself," I said. Another pause, and they look again at each other. After a short moment, they turned back to me, and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come in while you call our mom?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer toward the door, like she was just going to walk on by me. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes, That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror. I don't think I've ever felt this terror in my life. I could feel every hair on my arm and back standing straight on end. I closed the door to where just my face was able to stick out. The little girl stopped and again pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took hold, and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door, "but I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them, just standing on the porch, just staring at me through the beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where these kids were. That would have freaked me out even more to not know where they went. After what seemed like forever, but probably only a few seconds, I decided I'd call my neighbor that lives across the street. As I made my way to the side table by our couch to my phone, I glanced back at the door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got to my phone and started to look for his contact info, my neighbor, it was only then the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk to the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look to see where they went, still not calling my neighbor yet. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but you can't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make you pretty obvious to anyone outside looking in. From the door, I could see that the kids were still standing under the street lamp nearest my house, staring at me. As I lifted the phone to my ear after calling, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and I had never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. But what I really think, what I have to think, is these kids were just out yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say they were good, really good. They scared the crap out of me and my dog. So that's just one encounter where we have a skeptic that is looking at it very intelligently, that it's probably just some kids that are up to some tricks. I'm going to read you one more quick story. This is the story of what happened when some folks let the kids in their home. The title of this one is, "I Let the Black-Eyed Children Inside My House." I live just outside of a rural town in Vermont. It's a tight-knit community where everyone knows one another, and people don't lock their doors at night. There has never been any need to. A little over a year ago, I woke up because I heard a loud banging on my front door. At the time, my husband and I lived in a small home on a dirt road just off the rural route into town. It was the middle of a snowstorm, and the nearby hills get very slippery in the snow, so I thought that someone might have been in an accident and broken down. It's happened before. When I looked out the window, I could see that our motion spotlight was on. I could see that there were footprints in the snow that had come from our road and into our driveway, but there was no car anywhere. The snow was still covering the road, and no one had driven on it for at least a couple hours. Our front door was obscured from the window, but I could see that someone was standing there. I wasn't sure what to think, so I woke my husband up just to feel safer. While I was telling him what was going on, the banging on the door started again, and my husband went to answer it while I stood in the hallway. When he opened the door, there were two children standing in the snow, looking toward the ground. They were a boy and a girl, and could not have been more than 8 years old. They were dressed strangely, and had odd haircuts. The girl's hair was very long and straight, and the boy had a dated haircut that looked almost like a bowl cut. They weren't dressed for winter, and my first thought was that they must have been Mennonite children. But as far as I know, there was never a large community of Mennonites near us. Thinking back on it, I know that my normal reaction to seeing children in a snowstorm would have been to rush them inside and bundle them up with some blankets and hot cocoa. But that's not how this felt. The children were very unnerving. They would not make eye contact, and when my husband asked them if everything was okay, they asked if they could come in. My husband looked at me like, "What do I do?" And I asked the kids where their parents were. "They'll be here soon," is all the kids said. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, so the only reasonable thought in my head was that there must have been an accident or these kids got lost. As much as my instincts told me not to bring them inside, I did it anyway. I went into the kitchen to make them some hot cocoa, while my husband took them into the living room. While I was fixing the kettle, I could hear my husband talking to the kids. He was asking them if they were okay, where they came from, how far they walked, if their parents' car was broken down, things like that. But they always answered, "Our parents will be here soon." They spoke in a sing-song voice. They weren't afraid to be in a stranger's home at all. I started to notice that our cats, which we had 4 of, were all hiding, except Pigeon. Pigeon was in the kitchen with me. Normally our cats are very curious and friendly when we have to be careful that they don't run out the door when we leave. This time, none of them tried to see who was here, which I thought was very strange. All of the hair on Pigeon's neck was standing up on his tail and was puffed up while he looked into the living room. When I bent down to pet him and see what was wrong, he hissed and started growling and backing up until he had himself under the kitchen island. I have never seen him do that before. When I walked back into the living room, the kids were sitting on the couch, as still as can be, but my husband was holding his head in his hands. I asked him what was wrong, and he just said that he felt very dizzy all of a sudden, but that he was fine. I turned back to the children to give them their cocoa, but when they looked at me, I gasped. It took everything inside me not to drop the mugs and run away. When they looked at me, their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. When they saw that I was scared, they stood up and asked if they could use the bathroom. I tried to be as composed as I could be and showed them down the hall. They went into the bathroom together, and I hurried back to my husband and asked him if he had seen their eyes. He had seen them too, and said that it looked like his brother's badly bruised eyes after a car accident. We were in the middle of talking about whose children they could be when my husband's nose started to bleed. He'd never had nosebleeds as long as I had known him. I just knew inside myself that this had something to do with the kids in the bathroom, and I started crying while I ran to get some tissues for my husband. That's when the power went out. I heard my husband yell my name from the living room. As I started to walk back through the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The 2 kids were standing at the end of the hall. They weren't moving, and I had never been so scared in my whole life. They just stood there in the dark. After what felt like forever, the boy said, "Our parents are here." And they walked to the door, opened it, and walked out, leaving the door wide open. My husband jumped up to go close it and almost fell over. We looked out the window and saw 2 men standing by a black car idling at the end of our driveway. The men looked like they were wearing black-colored suits and were very tall, at least 6 feet. When my husband waved at them, they just stared at us, got into the car, and drove off. Our power to the house came back on after about a half hour, but nothing was the same after that. Over the next few months, 3 of our cats went missing. We can only assume that they ran away and never came back, but the worst thing was coming home to find Pigeon in a puddle of blood on the living room floor. He looked like he had been vomiting blood. The vet told us that he had some kind of hemorrhage. After my husband's nosebleeds became a regular occurrence, we went to see the doctor. He didn't know what to make of it, other than dry nasal passages, but my husband was diagnosed with an aggressive skin cancer. When the doctor asked us if he used tanning beds, we both thought he was joking, but apparently this kind of melanoma is linked to overuse of indoor tanning beds. The doctors think he will recover, but don't understand how it got so bad so quickly. My husband has never worked an outdoor job and spends relatively little time in the sun. Since we let the black-eyed kids inside our home, I've also suffered from regular dizzy spells and nosebleeds on a regular basis. I've had other issues which I won't mention here, but trust me when I say that I am suddenly in the worst condition of my life, and no one can do anything about it. I know that all of this is because I let the black-eyed children into my home. We've told everyone we could about the strange kids that showed up that night, but no one else saw them, and some laugh at how scared we were of the Mennonite kids. But we know what we saw. I wish my husband had never opened that door. A very interesting tale, and it really makes you stop and think, is it some sort of entity? Is it kids just being kids? Very odd if this story is true, that it happened in a snowstorm, not a typical place that you would find children. What are these things? What are they doing? And why do they want to come into your home or your car? What's the point? You might wonder, are they ghosts? What are they? Are they some sort of evil entity? Some people have speculated that the black-eyed children are extraterrestrials or even alien-human hybrids. Some insist that they are some classification of ghost or spirit manifesting itself in order to complete a malevolent act. Black-eyed children have also thought to be vampires, but this is one of the less popular theories. I would say that no matter what you call them, all who encounter them seem to agree that they are harbingers of ill will and personal doom. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me today, and I want to encourage you to visit our forums on mythicradio.com. There you'll find all the topics that we discuss here on the podcast. Feel free to ask questions, post your own experiences, and start a new topic on what interests you. So guys, thanks again. I hope to see you back here on the next episode, and I really want you to know how much I appreciate the support and all of the downloads and the views and the likes. It really helps us to continue doing what we're doing. So have a great day, and we'll see you next time.